That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. That means a civil, contextualized conversation with perspective.
The workplace has shifted after 3 years of COVID. What it means for your pursuit of happiness. Join me on Primetime.
Stream on the free CBS.
Indicted every other day, especially with things happening over the White House. They are right now. They've got to take the pressure off them. So he's expecting more and more, but he'll fight through this. I mean, he's a true American.
Any concerns about his health, or have you noticed anything?
I always wish Leader McConnell well.
As a commander, you put out intent about what you want to see. If that intent is not followed, you ensure it's going to be followed. I think that we're in good shape.
That was Governor Ron DeSantis today speaking to CBS News, and we'll get you more of that interview in a moment. Hello, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. First tonight, the federal grand jury deciding whether to indict former President Donald Trump in the January 6th investigation reconvened today. Trump's lawyers were there too, meeting with federal prosecutors in the special counsel's office. In a Truth Social post, Trump wrote that it was, quote, a productive meeting. He is set to be on the campaign trail tomorrow in Iowa. So for more on this, let's bring in Scott MacFarlane and Robert Costa. Scott is CBS News congressional correspondent joining us from the courthouse, and Robert is CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent. Scott, I want to start with you, and I know you've been out there reporting in near 100-degree temperatures, so thank you for sticking with us. Can you kind of tell us what exactly happened today and why there was a thought that an indictment may be coming today?
A lot of notable activity, a flurry of it today. The grand jury that has been part of this investigation into efforts to overturn the 2020 election surfaced this morning and departed late, just as the courthouse doors were closing around the 5 p.m. Eastern time hour. They were not here, as was expected Tuesday, so their presence here today was noted. Came at the same time as Donald Trump acknowledged his attorneys, met with the special counsel, Jack Smith, at Jack Smith's office. Those two things happening in conjunction with each other a week and a half after Trump confirmed he got that target letter, revealing he's the target of a federal criminal investigation, put everybody's radar up. And there was this swell of activity at the courthouse as dozens of cameras descended here, some spectators and protesters descended here as well. As the day concluded, the magistrate judge told the courtroom official to tell us there would be no indictments in her courtroom today. The clerk gave the same indication as the day ended. So whatever is happening with this grand jury and this potential indictment is either still sealed, still under deliberation, or still just being kept from us until a later day.
So until that later day, until we figure out what exactly the decision that will be made from this grand jury, Bob, you know, you've been covering this investigation since before it even became an investigation. You've been covering the lead up to January 6th. So we have Jack Smith essentially looking into not only classified documents, but what Trump did leading up to and his behavior on January 6th. Tell us kind of what you see as the questions that you think are remaining for this grand jury. What is Jack Smith really looking at here?
The first cut at this was done by journalists who were investigating and reporting on January 6th, wondering what was going on behind the scenes inside the Oval Office in that post-election period in 2020. And then the second cut came from the January 6th committee in the House. They brought forward a lot of witnesses to testify under oath about what Trump was doing behind the scenes. But not everybody participated in the January 6th investigation. They got some text messages from Mark Meadows, but they didn't get full testimony in a major way. And so now you have a special counsel who has subpoena power in a very serious federal level way to compel these people to tell the full story, the complete story, to fill in the gaps. And so there are really a lot of lingering questions about what exactly was Trump doing and saying as he tried to overturn the election.
Right, because the committee could only recommend what they would like the DOJ to do, and now the DOJ is doing their investigation. When it comes to timelines, Scott, in terms of what comes next, not asking to predict the future here, but we know that this grand jury tends to meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Any sense of when we might get more clarity here?
They tend to until they don't. They weren't here Tuesday. At least they weren't seen here Tuesday. It doesn't preclude the possibility that schedule shifts again as the week concludes, as the month concludes, and into next week. We also know, though, that there's a time sensitivity to all this politically. It doesn't mean there's a time sensitivity to this legally. July 27th gives way to August 27th, gives way to September 27th. Federal prosecutions tend to move at a speed measured in months. They don't move like a sprinter at the Olympics. The political reality may not be a function of what they're considering here. The timeliness comes when it's ready, not when it's wanted.
Yeah, that's a good point about the political calendar versus the real one. Bob, speaking of that political calendar, I mean, this comes as Donald Trump is still considered the front runner for the Republican nomination. I want to play a little bit of sound that we heard from lawmakers on Capitol Hill today.
We all expect it to happen. He gets indicted every other day, especially with things happening over the White House.
Maybe they can get an indictment out of a grand jury, but the evidence that leads to a conviction would be damn difficult to get. And I think it's frankly unnecessary at this point.
I don't think those who are digging up charges to file understand how they are hurting their own credibility and case.
So this echoes a lot of what we've been hearing from Republican voters on the campaign trail, but I'm curious, talking to the Trump campaign and your sources, kind of, they seem to have a playbook of sorts, right? There's an indictment, the Republican Party comes to his defense. Is there any concern that they have about this particular indictment, or do you think we're going to see kind of the same thing play out?
Caitlin, actions speak, and based on my conversations with Trump allies tonight, he's going to be sitting down with a conservative news outlet this evening in New Jersey. Why would he do that? As you know, because he wants to make sure he's connecting with that conservative audience at this fragile political and legal moment, to make sure his own base supporters are still with him, that they're taking his cue, not reading any kind of indictment or news story about a looming indictment. They want Trump to define the terms of how this story is done. The other intriguing part of this whole dynamic is what's going on Capitol Hill. So many Republicans now are pressing to investigate President Biden and Hunter Biden, potentially even consider impeachment proceedings as a way of having politically a parallel track of investigations. So while Trump's under intense legal scrutiny from the Justice Department, they can point at President Biden at the same time. That's not to say they're equivalent from a reporting or legal or political point of view, but it's indicative of how Republicans are going to approach this moment.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, Scott. And I want to, Bob, and I want to ask you, Scott, since you cover Capitol Hill, and we've been covering this week the reaction to the Hunter Biden news earlier. Do you sense that this is something that may, fuel the already kind of intense efforts to kind of shift the focus?
There was an adrenaline shot given to House Republicans this week because of what happened in Wilmington. This effort they are undertaken to argue there's a two-tier justice system has been based on an argument that Hunter Biden, in their words, got a sweetheart deal. And the judge in Wilmington raised questions, raised red flags about that deal this week. It really lit a flame beneath House Republicans, who are chomping at the bit to respond to the potential indictment of Donald Trump here, to again argue it's a weaponization of government. There's been no indication even a case rooted to January 6th will change the political calculus inside the Republican conference or Donald Chance's prospects for a Republican primary. But there is still that potential, at least with some subset of Americans outside the political circles, that this case just lands differently. It's not as obscure as the case in Manhattan. It's not as dense, potentially, as the case in Florida. This is an experience everybody witnessed on television January 6th. Even if the political calculus doesn't change, it may be differently received by the public in general.
Yeah, especially if you have a Republican Party and candidates wanting to move on and focus on Biden and playing these clips over and over again. However, we'll see if any of his rivals start to hit him on this the further this campaign goes. Scott MacFarlane and Bob Costa, thank you both for covering this in and out day after day for us. We'll have you keep us posted. We appreciate your time and reporting. Speaking of the presidential campaign trail, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is in Iowa in the midst of a campaign reset. And he spoke earlier today with our own Ed O'Keefe. And we'll hear more of that conversation next. You're streaming America Decides.
It's important to our nation.
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
It's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And there becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're going to tell you about that, too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
the threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bringing virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Now one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
people are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether,
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
Welcome back to America Decides. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is campaigning in Iowa today, and he spoke to voters as part of a bus tour that was set up by a super PAC supporting him. He also spoke with CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, and Ed began by asking him if this campaign shakeup we've been reporting on this week is over or whether there are still changes to come.
As a commander, you put out intent about what you want to see. If that intent is not followed, you ensure it's going to be followed. I think that we're in good shape. I think this has been a great area for us. We're going to continue going out and meeting with individual voters in all these early states, and that's going to be the focus, and that's really been the focus all along.
Across other parts of the country today, there's a lot of waiting and seeing about the former president and the potential legal issues he may yet face. If you're talking to Republican primary voters in this state and across the country, how should they be thinking about him, and how should they be factoring in the legal challenges that he's facing? Is that something that disqualifies him? Is it something that should make them look at someone like you instead?
Well, I think voters have to make those decisions on that. I think what I can say is, what we need to make the election about is a referendum on Biden's failed policies and our positive vision to get America on the right track, and then who can win, and then who can actually deliver on these things. So, for example, I'm very frustrated with the FBI and the Department of Justice. A lot of our voters have seen a two-tiered standard justice weaponization. So, okay, what are we going to do about it? I'll go in and end the weaponization. We will have a new FBI director. We will clean house. We will ensure that we're involved in making sure that they're staying within the lines. And you're going to see big changes. I will get that done. So I would just tell voters, think about, okay, what does the country need going forward, and who's most likely to bring those policies about? And I think my record in Florida shows when I say I'm going to do something, I deliver on it, and I'll do the same thing as president.
Does all of this legal stuff he's facing disqualify him, though, in your view?
At the end of the day, voters make that decision. Some people ask me, like, well, if somebody's indicted, should they be able to run? The problem is we've seen political indictments. I mean, I think Bragg was political. You have these people. So that would just give any prosecutor the ability to render someone ineligible. So I've not said that. But I also think just at the end of the day, the election's got to be about the future. It's got to be about what people are concerned about. And the more it's about other things, the more Biden's able to hang out in the basement again and end up cruising to a victory. And I know Republicans don't want that to happen.
You're getting ready to give a big economic speech on Monday in New Hampshire.
Are you going to be there?
We'll see.
Okay.
We're checking the flights. But about reviving the American dream and your thoughts on economic growth, 2.4% quarterly growth, though, in the last quarter.
Yeah, but that's
not good.
But that's not been. If you look at the last decade or so, our growth has been in the 1% on average. We've not been able to grow like we need to. So that's going to be a part of it. We need to get to 3% growth. Not only is that more opportunity for people, all these budget issues are so much easier to solve if you have that. So that's going to be one component of it. The other component, and there's going to be many, but it's at the end of the day, we talk about economy. What does that even mean? It means what kind of society do we want? And I want, if you work hard, you work to get the most of your God-given ability, you ought to be able to afford a house and a car and do all those things. And that's not been what we've seen over these last few years. I think government policy is a big reason why prices have gone up and people have lacked opportunity. So we're going to correct a lot of that, but always focus on, we're a country with an economy, not the other way around. I want to make sure American citizens are put first and foremost. We've got to reevaluate this relationship with the Communist Party of China. That has not been good for us. China has gotten much more powerful. They've taken all this industry. It's hollowed out parts of our country. And now we have almost a peer competitor militarily. So we need to do more of that here in the United States.
So if there's a DeSantis administration, how quickly does the United States get to 3% growth?
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of different factors. I think we will put policies in place that are going to pave the way. I mean, for example, we're going to do energy independence. We're going to use more of our domestic energy, open that up. I think it's good for our industrial base. I think it's good for jobs. And I think it's ultimately very good for prices for individuals to be able to afford. That's going to make a difference. We're going to be getting rid of a lot of the bureaucracy that the Biden administration's imposed on the economy. That's going to help small businesses. And at the end of the day, we need healthy small business. We need them to grow. In Florida, we lead the nation in new business formation. Our growth rate's been much more than 2% since I've been governor, and we basically have functionally zero unemployment. Anyone that wants a job can get a job. And oh, by the way, we've reduced our state's debt by almost 25% since I've been governor. Imagine if we actually reduced debt federally.
I want to ask you one other on the weather. It's been extremely hot across the entire country. They say now July may be the hottest month ever around the world. You saw triple-digit water temperatures in Florida this past week. Is there something the federal government should be doing, can do, or maybe should not do to fight extreme weather as it changes around the world?
Well, look, what I would say, Florida, first of all, we live with this. We're prepared. Of course, this is hurricane season, so when you have warmer temperatures, that can whip up more storms. And so that's just something we're locked and loaded for. It's something we look at very, very seriously, and we've had to contend with that over the years. Here's the problem, I think, with what Biden's doing with the Green New Deal and those types of policies. China's adding a new coal plant, every week, every 2 weeks. They are not going to change any of their behavior. Meanwhile, we're kneecapping some of our industries. In Florida, we've had a huge reduction in emissions without having any of those mandates. Why? Because innovation has taken hold. You've gone to to cleaner fossil fuels, and solar is actually economic. Not because of subsidies, not because we're forcing it, but because that's how the markets develop. So we need to have innovation, and we need to have people be able to make decisions. Don't try to force this. Don't force people into electric vehicles if that's something they can't afford or don't want. That just makes us more dependent on China.
So your argument is the economic policies they've enacted may or may not be helping, but is there anything else the federal government could do?
Command and control is not going to work on any of this stuff, but if you are trying to do command and control, which they want to do, and yet they look at China and they're just shrugging their shoulders. China has way more emissions than we do, and that's escalating all the time. So what you're doing is not ultimately going to be effective, even if you think that reduction is going to lead to an immediate change in the weather.
Vice President Harris is coming to Iowa tomorrow to, in essence, troll you guys who are all gathering tomorrow night in Des Moines, or at least call out Republican policies as she sees them. What do you make of her decision to come here?
I thank her. I mean, the more that it's me versus Harris, because ultimately, if you look at the next election, she's going to be the VP. It's possible she could end up being president of the United States. And I think voters need to take a hard look at that and see if that's something that they would want. I can tell you, I think the more they see, the more they would not want. And she was demagoguing Florida's curriculum with African-American history. Most states don't even have African-American history standards. I think it's like 13 or 14 states. We're one of them that do. We had really serious scholars, African-American, many of them, put out a huge compendium about all these things that many other states are not requiring. And she tried to demagogue it, saying somehow that was like justifying slavery, which was totally the opposite. I mean, they were very clear about the injustices. She's now been called on that because she supported an AP African-American history course that had the same thing in it, didn't make a peep at that time. So when people see that, they're like, look, we've got serious issues here in this country. Don't try to demagogue something. And I get like some people in the press will amplify, but ultimately people want the truth.
But was picking a fight with Congressman Donalds on this?
It's not picking a fight. It's, look, at the end of the day, Floridians should stand up for Florida. Don't side with Kamala Harris and liberals who are demagoguing this. These are people that worked really hard on this. Our State Board of Education approved it. You had nobody raising a ruckus about this until it became convenient to try to do it. So I would just say, I'd ask all my colleagues in Florida, stand up for your state. Don't side with Kamala Harris.
All right. Governor, thank you for taking a few minutes. We appreciate it.
And Ed O'Keefe joins us now from Indianola, Iowa. Ed, good to see you. Great get there with the governor. You asked him about his campaign reset. I also thought it was fascinating to hear that he said that voters should decide what to make of the indictments on Trump. What do you make of his responses there and anything that you've seen notable from how he's been interacting on the trail today?
Caitlin, there are those Republican candidates who say that the legal issues facing the former president are disqualifying and he should no longer be in the race, and there are those that don't. And he's clearly still in that camp of people who say, let the voters sort that out. But, and then makes the argument that the Justice Department, the FBI have to be revamped, and that's something we're hearing from several other contenders as well. The point, though, that he continues to make, even if he doesn't make it first, is the more attention that's focused on the former president's legal issues, the more the Republican Party is not focused on defeating President Biden. That is a compelling point that I believe he and his team suspect is going to continue to catch on with GOP voters as the primaries and the caucuses near. And it's the one he's sticking to for now. But he is certainly not in that Chris Christie, Asa Hutchinson, to some extent Will Hurd camp, which frankly isn't doing as well anyway. He's more still in that let the voters decide for themselves.
Yeah, Ned, it seems like a way to kind of thread the needle with the Trump base, not alienate them, but also making a pitch for a different turning of the page, perhaps. Well, Ed O'Keefe, great interview, as always, and we'll follow your reporting there in Iowa. Thank you so much. And speaking of the 2024 race for the White House, according to a new analysis, it could really just come down to a handful of states, despite being months away from the first primary, of course. But the reason why is next. You're streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony Dvoldar from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
an original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Welcome back to America Decides. Presidential election cycles often feel very turbulent. The truth is, it's the same story in most states across the country. From 2008 until now, only these 10 states have voted for nominees from both political parties. So that means that 80% of the U.S. is voting the same way without fail. A new analysis from the Cook Political Report takes a look at which states are true toss-ups and which states may be vulnerable to flip. Joining us now is Amy Walter, editor-in-chief and publisher of the Cook Report and friend to us here at CBS News. Great to see you, Amy. Thank you so much for being here.
Great to see you.
Great to be with you. So what I found fascinating in this is that we talk about a national campaign all the time, but it really, according to your analysis, comes down to just 4 states: Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. That, to me, suggests that this is a very narrow race that determines the presidency.
That's exactly right. I mean, if you look at our last 2 presidential elections, in 2016, basically 3 states and 79,000 votes spread across those 3 states in the Midwest, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. That gave Donald Trump the Electoral College victory. And then 4 years later, the 3 states of the 3 closest states were Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin. 42,000 votes between those 3 states helped to elect Joe Biden. So we've had these last 2 elections incredibly close. It is likely, not at 100% given, but it's likely we're going to see a rematch between the 2020 candidates. And you're not going to see many voters actually change their mind. Those who voted for Trump suddenly deciding to vote for Biden or vice versa. So it feels like we're going to see something of a replay there. It really is, in my mind, a question, too, of whether one campaign or the other can put one of the states that's on the bubble into a more competitive place. For Democrats, they've been looking at North Carolina for a long, long time. Barack Obama carried that state in 2008, but no other federal candidate has been able to win there. But they've lost by the tiniest of margins, about a point or 2. And for Republicans, it's Nevada, another state that looks tantalizingly close, just about 2 points determining the winner of that state, being able to push those seats into play. That gives you a little wider of a playing field, but not much.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see kind of some of these newer states in terms of how we think about the political map, like Georgia coming in and playing such a key role, not only in the presidential race, but also in the Senate race. Amy, while I have you, because you have covered these campaigns for so long, you're such an expert, I'm curious what you make of the DeSantis campaign at this point. Earlier this week, we were kind of trying to draw some historical context here with McCain, Jeb Bush, and some others. For our audience, kind of how are you assessing what this campaign looks like, this reset, and whether, we may be having a different conversation come 6 months from now?
That's right. I do think these debates coming up in August are going to tell us a lot. I don't think we're going to see much movement between now and the end of August. And of course, a lot of this depends on who actually shows up at the debate, namely, will Donald Trump be there? But Caitlin, I've been talking a lot about this with folks who've been doing politics for a long time. And yes, there are candidates who at this time of the year, or maybe a little bit later in the off year, were seen as frontrunners, but fell behind. And we spent much of the time going into the first primaries or caucuses saying, boy, this frontrunner really flopped. Are they going to be able to win it back? And John McCain was one prime example of someone who was able to win it back. John Kerry was another one in 2004. The difference, though, Caitlin, is that they were the front runners who fell back and then came back, right? So they were on top, they faltered, but then they came back to win. In the case of Ron DeSantis, he's never been the front runner. Now, he was close in polling to Donald Trump late last year, earlier this year, but he was never the absolute front runner. The only example I can think of someone who was very much hyped going into a race, but was not considered the front runner and then went on to win was Barack Obama in 2008. But here's the big difference. The first is Donald Trump is essentially the incumbent. He obviously was the president, and he's also starting off with 100% name recognition, and he's very well liked among the base. That is very tough to do, to knock off an incumbent. And finally, I don't know that DeSantis has the inroads into picking off voters that Barack Obama did in 2007 and 2008. Remember, for Obama, the Iraq War was really a definitive issue, and one in which he could really draw a distinction with Hillary Clinton. As you and Ed were talking about earlier, there is a clear issue, the issue of indictment, but the candidates who are closest in the polls to Donald Trump, and even then, by closest, meaning they're still far behind him, but at least they're registering in the polling, they don't want to touch that at all. So, boy, that presents a very difficult path.
Yeah, kind of reluctance to try to really change the trajectory of this race, at least when it comes to Donald Trump. But we shall see, and that's why we will continue talking to you, Amy. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. Good to see you too. And that does it for us today. You can stream America Decides Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all 4-star generals and admirals.
How did you deal with being discriminated against?
I just worked harder. The future of an ever-evolving U.S. military when we go person to person.
Stories start with the